Uh, yes, sir. Prantik, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thanks a lot, sir. SOS.
That's all right. Yeah, it's just that it left me a little breathless.
Sir,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll start at around 1:35.
Okay, fine. So, heartiest congratulations, Dr. Kapil.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Wonderful.
That was surprise to me as well. Really speaking.
Oh no, it's no surprise. No, it's no surprise to me, and well deserved, like I said.
Yeah.
The special task force constituted by the Vice Chancellor for the next academic session, or is it like?
No, only till the next elections are held.
Yeah. Okay. When is the notification coming out, Kapil? Any idea?
Yeah. By this evening or Monday morning.
Okay.
Beyond that, this is what ma'am told this morning.
Okay.
VC sir has signed it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, all formality is over now.
Finally.
Just a minute, sir. So, friends, due to some technical problem at the end of Sir Pinaki Roy, we were unable to conduct his session, which was scheduled to be scheduled at 1 o'clock. And as always, I sought help from Prantik sir, and as always, sir is there to help us out from this situation as well. And Prantik sir otherwise doesn't need any kind of introduction in English circles. But even in spite of that, the formality has to be done. But sir is here for the fourth session, so we need not go with that formality as well. And on behalf of the HRDC department of HRDC of Nagpur University and the participants, I welcome sir to this session of the refresher course in English. And sir will be making a presentation on the topic is what you write readable, research and the craft of writing. And I welcome sir and hand over the mic to him for proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Kapil sir. Thank you. All right. A very good afternoon to the participants. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So for a minute, I thought, I was in a Harold Pinter's absurd play called The Dumb Waiter. So where there is a failure of communication. Anyway, so I'm back again, and a very good afternoon to everybody. And I wonder whether I'm drawing the curtains down on your refresher course. Am I the last speaker, or do you have another session
tomorrow? We have the first session in the morning tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So I'm the penultimate speaker for you all.
Yes, sir.
All right. And I thought, I thought I would do things a little different today. I was going through again the list of topics that were covered day before, and it's a pretty impressive list of topics. And but I thought I'll do something, shall I say, more grounded and rooted, something away from theory, and something that probably we need to, especially in refresher course, we need to press the refresh button and go back to research writing, because after all, I mean, the very purpose of a refresher course is not only to introduce you to new areas of research, uh, keep you abreast and updated with the latest theoretical, critical trends, as well as new kinds of writing. But I thought I also would, in today's talk, I would emphasize, I would take you back to basics, and which is research writing. Um, and I think a lot needs to be done in terms of research writing. Um, I have and therefore the title of my talk today is What You Write Readable? Research and the craft of writing. We all are researchers here, and before, I think the kind of research workshops, or what do you call, yeah, the research workshops that we have, especially for humanities, um, right after you register for your PhD, which is now made compulsory, I think doesn't do justice to in inculcating, in training young researchers, particularly young researchers, in the craft of writing. You will agree with me when I say that, in all through all our masters, unless you have taken a specialized elective on research methodology and research writing, uh, the mechanics of writing, and I'm not talking about the subject of research, I'm talking more about the mechanics of writing. It means um, simple things like what is the what do we call when we say when we talk about an academic style or a style of research writing? How do we structure and organize our papers, for instance? What we write in our papers, what we write in our dissertations, and how do we turn our how do we organize our ideas and our analysis in a way in which not only be it will not only be readable, but it will also draw more and more citation, because everything today, with gas and our PBAS, our annual, the way in which our assessment, our performances are assessed as teachers, is very much, fortunately or unfortunately, seems to be controlled by the metrics of our API scores. And research, as you all know, is a major component of that. So I thought I'll take something very basic and fundamental, but it is good to go back to basics, because then you always find that there is some lacuna, or there is always some gap in your own research writing, which we thought perhaps my talk will attempt to sort of cover. Of course, uh, I, you know, I begin my talk today with this caveat that it's impossible to cover all aspects of research writing within 90 minutes, but I'm going to focus on two major areas, which hopefully will be of use to you. But first, first let me share my screen with you. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Visible your screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So this, friends, is the topic of my fourth lecture with you, is What You Write Readable? Research and the Craft of Writing. I'm sure many of us would have heard the name of Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman, considered to be one of the most prominent physicists, and he won the Nobel Prize. He won the Nobel Prize for physics, for quantum physics, for his breakthrough research in quantum physics in 1961 or 62. I'm not sure about that. And I'm sure many of us would have heard about the Feynman lectures. The Feynman lectures, friends, are considered to be a classic in creative teaching in physics. They're considered to be, the lectures themselves have become canon. They have become canonical. And they are, as I said, even today in some of the top universities across America, whether it is Caltech, the University of California, or Stanford or Princeton, um, these lectures by Richard Feynman, which he delivered way back in the 1960s, are considered to be almost cult or canonical. Now, why I'm saying this is, a, a bit of a background about the Feynman lectures. I said Feynman won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1962. He became as a celebrity, a celebrated Nobel laureate, as one would expect. But people from the University of California, the University of Technology, California, his own alma mater, uh, their board members requested him to design and deliver an introductory course to undergraduate students in his university, the University of Technology in California. Now, this is interesting. Why did the board members ask a Nobel Prize winning physicist to design and deliver, not just to design the syllabus, but also to teach that syllabus? For whom? For first year students, for undergraduate students, for freshers. Well, the reason perhaps the board gave wanted Feynman to sort of share his breakthrough, his path-breaking findings in quantum physics with not the scientist community, but with freshers, with novices, with undergraduate students, was perhaps because they wanted the board members of the University of Technology wanted Penman to sort of try and inculcate a critical and inquiring mind among the students at the very start of a college program, at the very start of their engineering program. Now, what followed was something extraordinary. Uh, Feynman, uh, Feynman agreed to the proposal of the board members, and he turned his findings, his research work in quantum physics into a series of lectures, which became sort of super duper hits with not only with students, but also faculty across American campuses. And because these lectures were recorded, a team of physicists and students got together, they came together and put his lectures in manuscript form, and later on published his lectures um, as the Penman Lectures, which, as I said, is regarded as a cult classic. Now, this would, of course, remind you also with the case of a certain Mr. Ferdinand Saussure, whose students also turned his lecture notes, into book form. Of course, it was published posthumously. Now, what is coming back to the Feynman example is that I find I'm giving you this example precisely because when I came upon this fact, it seemed to me pretty astounding, extraordinary, that Feynman, a specialist on quantum physics and a Nobel Prize winner in physics, he could simplify. He could simplify and make even undergraduate students of his um, uh, understand his research findings, that he could convey his findings in physics in a language that even beginners could get it. And no wonder his lectures, Penman's lectures, for what they were creative. His lectures were creative. His lectures were imaginative. His lectures were full of beans, and of course, very popular. It's because of these, the kind of teacher that he was, a teacher and a researcher, the best of two, the best combination of two that made the world acknowledge him as an extraordinary teacher among researchers. Now, why do I give you an example of Richard Feynman? Precisely because I narrate this anecdote because through it, I wish to raise some of my own concerns about the quality of research writing in our academia. Um, and so, I would start today's session, warm you up to it, by asking a couple of questions about what you think about our research in um, quality of research in English studies. Is it original? Is it interesting? Or for that matter, even simply, at a very simple and basic level, is our research writing readable? I mean, how many of us, you publish, we all are researchers, you publish a paper, a recent paper, can you turn that paper into talking points in a class filled with, let's say, first year students, and make them, and make the research of in your paper absolutely interesting and comprehensible for your students? What I'm asking you is, can you turn your research paper, a recent published research paper, into a lecture which your undergraduate students will find it not only fascinating, but will be able to understand it? I mean, this is a challenge that we can take upon ourselves. Of course, the question is, are we willing to set ourselves up for this challenge? And I think we need to do that, because the minute you turn your paper, an academic exercise in which probably has the register of an academic style or a journal style, you need to turn your research findings, your inferences, your conclusions, your theoretical framework, and even your subject into lecture notes, classroom notes for your first year students who would get it. In other words, you need to convert your research paper in a style which is clear, which is lucid, and which is easily communicable. You see, when we think of research, when we think of doing research, you and I do research not because we want only the three colleagues in our department to read, or the one supervisor or the two examiners to read our research. We don't even want our research papers to be published in only those journals which have a limited circulation. I'm sure, if you're a genuine researcher, if you're a good researcher, you want the findings of your research, especially one that you believe is original and authentic. You want that paper to be dispersed. You want that paper to be circulated amongst the widest number of readers in our academic community. And that's how also you raise the bar of your research, of the quality of your research writing. You also, in the process, you also profit from the citation index, which is so essential for our promotions, for our academic growth. I take you back to, therefore, asking yourself this question: what is research? It's good to go back to the basics. So when you think of what is research, this great American philosopher and literary critic named Kenneth Burke, I mean, he describes the research paper as an engagement. He says, doing research or writing a research paper is like entering into a conversation, an intelligent, well-informed conversation that can stretch back hundreds and thousands of years and include any number of other scholarly voices as well. So as a researcher, when you are doing research, writing a paper or writing your thesis, I mean, according to Kenneth Burke, you contribute to that conversation by making yourself an informed participant to it. You become not just a careful reader of a particular text or a collection of texts, but you become a historian. You become a historian of those texts. You become a historian of that particular theoretical position. For instance, as a researcher, you know where the text was born, who its friends and enemies were, and what it accomplished, for better or worse. Take, for example, I'll give you an example, the critical research. Take, for instance, a text like Charlotte Bronte's, or rather, Jean Rhys's White Sargasso. Now, White Sargasso, if you look at the history of the critical reception of White Sargasso, Jean Rhys's, this Caribbean writer's White Sargasso, which came out in 1966. I mean, traditionally, Rhys's White Sargasso has been received critically as a sort of a counter narrative to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. To look at the trajectory of how the novel was received since its publication over 70 years ago, is to understand how at different times during this particular span of time, readers researchers and experts have responded to the same text in very different ways. 1960, 1966 and a few years later, on the publication of White Sagacity, Rees's novel was being critically acclaimed as an example of bold modernist experimental fiction. Those of us who have read or who teach White Sagacity in the classroom, we know the kind of experiments that she does in giving us three different narratorial voices in the telling of the story. In the 1980s, the same book was being reread. It was being reread by many scholars as a radical feminist text. Radical feminists, like particularly scholars like Gilbert and Gubber, you know, in their very famous seminal book called The Mad Woman in the Attic. And then in the 1990s, the same text was again being examined. That is, Rees's White Sagacity was being examined as a post-colonial text, not just a feminist text, but an example of post-colonial feminist text, particularly in the essay by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Now, what I'm trying to draw your attention is that as a researcher, if think about a researcher studying this particular text at any moment of its long journey of being published, circulated, and then received critically. At any point in time in its long journey, a researcher would have responded to White Sagacity by contributing to the conversation, by contributing to this ongoing conversation, this never stopping discourse on White Sagacity, by choosing any of these possible positions, either looking at it as a sort of a modernist, as an example of modernist experimental fiction, or looking at it from a feminist lens, or finding out traces of colonialism and racism in the novel. Now, the point is that whatever be the timeline of the researcher, whether a researcher was doing research in the 70s, 90s, or even even today, each of these researchers would be contributing to the conversations about the text. And I personally, I feel it's not just the text that becomes important. Therefore, the conversation is probably more important than the text, because this conversation, frankly, friends, is never really just about the text, not about the author. It is about what we read, how we read, and why we read, and what we value. So what is research? Well, Kenneth Burke has a very good definition, the one that you see on your slide. It says that a research paper is a piece of textual analysis that adds your critical voice to an ongoing conversation. And this is what I explained to you, that this conversation about the text, about the writer, doesn't ever come to a full stop. There is no final word in research. There are no absolute positions in research, and there are no definitive conclusions in research. Friends, are you with me?
Yeah, sir. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. What I want to show you next is a book that I make it mandatory for my research scholars to read. This is a book which came out way back in 1977. And in fact, you might think, because of its date, you might think that how could a book like this be relevant to today's research, to today's researcher? Well, this is Umberto Eco's book, How to Write a Thesis. And Umberto Eco, those of us I'm sure many of you who do postmodernism, it was this book, or rather, it was Umberto Eco's book called The Name of the Rose. Name of the Rose, I think came out in 1980. It was this book which catapulted him to international fame. Umberto Eco, we all know he is an illustrious semiotician as well as a postmodernist novelist. And but my focus is on this book, How to Write a Thesis. Umberto Eco was not only um, a postmodernist writer, a world famous postmodernist writer, but he started his career as and continued to be a professor of the University of Turin in Italy. And it was during his stint on campus that he decided to write a book which he titled rather unpretentiously, How to Write a Thesis. Why did he write this book? Primarily to help his research students, to help his own research students and the research community, the teachers and students of the University of Turin. Now, this book has been translated, How to Write a Thesis has been translated into 17 languages. It finally appeared in English, which itself is surprising, in 2015. And like I said, how to write a thesis, I mean, a book with a title such as this may not seem to you very attractive. But how to write a thesis, even today, continues to deliver a lot of practical advice to would-be researchers or those who are researching. It gives you, it's a sort of a compendium or a handbook of practical wisdom, like the Baconian essay. It's a handbook of practical wisdom. It gives you tips right from choosing how to choose the right topic and how to take down notes and how do you master the final draft. It provides, this book is a must read for all researchers, also because here is a postmodernist novelist and a professor of comparative literature writing a book on research. And the book turns out to give you far more meaningful lessons that can equip you for a lifetime, not just for your writing, not just for the writing of a paper or a thesis. So what you find in this book, you open the covers of the book and you come across lines which I feel are nuggets of wisdom. For example, he says, your thesis is like your first love. Your thesis is like your first love. It will be difficult to forget. I mean, that immediately changes. It actually airbrushes all the cobwebs of your mind, thinking that when you're doing something academic, far too often we take an academic exercise such as writing a research paper or doing our thesis as an absolutely rigorous, back-breaking exercise. And here is a postmodernist writer, a famous writer, and a professor, and a researcher, and a scholar telling us that your thesis is like your first love. It's difficult to forget. I mean, to romance your research, to date your research, to romance your research, and turn your research into a lifelong relationship. Rather humorously, Umberto Eco gives us also the thumb rule of thesis writing, which I find very, very, it should be put on every researcher's table, the thumb rule. And what is the thumb rule that Umberto Eco gives? He says, you must write a thesis that you are able to write. You must write a thesis that you are able to write. Friends, I find, and I bring in Umberto Eco also because I find a book such as this, where he gives such a whole lot of advice, practical tips about writing, about the mechanics of writing, about the basic skills and tools of writing. I look at the condition of the state of research in India, particularly in English literature. And sadly, a majority of research writing in India in English studies is marred by poor writing, by poor academic writing. And I find that two common reasons are ambiguity and redundancy. ambiguity because many researchers write in a style that is not clear and precise. I mean, many a research paper gets rejected, doesn't get the approval of referees or reviewers of good journals because of a poor style of writing. Forget the topic, forget the subject of the research. I'm talking about the style of writing. And what do we mean by a poor academic writing? By that I mean, a writing that is characterized by poor organization of thoughts and even sometimes as basic as incorrect order of words, incorrect choice and order of words, which creates ambiguity. The other common flaw for poor quality of academic writing is redundancy. We Indians love words, don't we? I mean, we are as a as a as a na- as a nation, I think we are one of the most verbose nations in the world. And redundancy in this sort of Indian trait is reflected also in the style of our writing, academic writing, because redundancy is the result of using 5 words, using 10 words where one will do. It's the tendency to use superfluous words that and which often makes your own writing difficult to read and understand. I've randomly chosen what you see on your slide. Sorry, what you see on your slide is two PhD topics, titles rather. Look at the first one. Language acquisition through social media discussions, potential of semantic network representations, and effect of conceptual facilitation restrictiveness. I mean, I probably will end up breaking my teeth or even make myself breathless in reading out the full title of this thesis. And it's not merely the length of the title that is problematic for me here. It's the choice of words. I won't go into the detail except to point out to you that a title such as this is so off-putting only because it doesn't have a verb. It's full of compound nouns. So these and so many titles of papers and theses that make for research in English studies, I find is particularly, is a reflection of the way in which Indian researchers, we researchers are most of us are afflicted by a pandemic of incomprehensible jargon. I mean, there are many researchers who feel that in order to make their papers seem heavy, they need to put their ideas and arguments in a high academic style. By high, I mean in an inflated style with a lot of jargon. It's like that Peanuts cartoon, where I came upon this Peanuts cartoon, and I remember one of the characters saying that I realized that the real purpose of writing is to inflate weak ideas, to obscure poor reasoning, and to restrict clarity. Whereas the real goal of all research writing would be to make your ideas intelligible by writing in a style which is clear, which is precise, and which is potent. So as a researcher, one should avoid falling into the trap of being a sesquipedalist. Well, here is Shashi Tharoor for you. A sesquipedalist is a lover of big words. So one can't be a researcher and be a Tharoor at the same time. But then, what about the critical register of academic life? Well, I'll give you one more instance. This is a very famous, or rather an infamous episode that took place in the academia. In the late 1990s, Alan Sokal, again a professor of physics in the New York University, he wrote a paper on a social subject. But what is important is that he glossed that paper in jargon, the kind of, high theory, putting in a lot of high sounding words from borrowing from critical theory, borrowing from social theories. And remember, he was a physicist. So social theory was not even his field, but he wanted to prove something. And this is what you see on the slide. Are my slides moving? Can you read them? Can you read the Sokal affair?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So look at what Alan Sokal said later. He said, I decided to try a modest experiment with a leading North American journal of culture studies, whose editorial collectives include such luminaries as Frederick Jameson and Andrew Ross, publish an article liberally salted with nonsense. Mark that word, liberally salted with nonsense, if A, it sounded good, and B, it flattered the editor's ideological preconception. I'm paying more attention to the first one. Sokal was trying to write a paper, or rather trying to fake a paper, not write, but fake a paper, filling it with gibberish, filling it with lots of words and phrases from social theory, contemporary social theory. And what was the experiment? He wanted to find out if his so-called research paper would be accepted by a leading North American journal, all social text. And what do you know? His paper was published, which actually proved his hypothesis that if you cloak even nonsense, if you wrap up even nonsense in a particular critical jargon, in a particular style of writing, it might pass muster with some of the best of critics. Of course, the reason why he did this experiment, or rather played this hoax, was precisely because he was, he felt he was critiquing sometimes the very dense academic writing of many postmodernist thinkers, including Derrida and Baudrillard and Spivak. Which should remind you of what I started with the Feynman example of how a nuclear physicist could turn his path-breaking research into lectures which were easily understood by his own undergraduate students. Friends, I mean, yes, when you are doing research, you obviously cannot write in a simplified language, because every discipline has its own register. It has its own style, and to a certain extent, jargon, theory and jargon cannot be avoided. I mean, literary criticism has its own technical terms, as do all other disciplines. So yes, so if you want to really look at Shakespeare's Hamlet in the light of psychoanalysis, or if you want to reread Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, in the light of semiotics, or for that matter, even Eliot's Four Portraits in the light of Einstein's theory of relativity, all of these would require you to write in a style which is not for the common reader. However, and this is the caveat, and this is what I want you to alert you. You should, as a researcher, you should never try to pack your essay or even your seminar or conference presentation full of impressive sounding theory speak, which is not so easily understood, in the hope that even if you don't understand, the audience will. Please do not reduce your writing to a babel of sounds. Do not reduce your research writing to something simply gibberish. And so what is the primary purpose? Why do we do research? I think the primary purpose is something as basic as how to make our research readable and comprehensible. Because remember, I said, we do research, we write research, not because we want only 5 people to read it. We want research to be accessible. We want to be turning our research into books, which could be like a Jacob Bronowski, for example, or a Bertrand Russell, for example, a Richard Feynman, for example, or a Stephen Hawking, for example, all of whom have turned some of their own complex theories into easily comprehensible and eminently readable stories. You know, the ancients had a very good model to give you for doing research. Of course, um, this model is perhaps we all have read the Quintilian, isn't it? When we did classical criticism, Quintilian, the famous Roman rhetorician, and what he says about the art of rhetoric, that if you want to master the art of rhetoric, then he says that there are three key things that you need to keep in mind in order to present a good argument. One, the first one he says is in inventio. The first thing he says is inventio, or the discovery, which really means, in the context of a research paper, it means the argument, your thesis statement, your argument, or your research problem. Then second, after inventio is, according to Quintilian, it is dispositio. Dispositio, that is the ordering of things, how you organize, how you give to your research a structure, how you break down your argument into logical steps. And the third, which is the focus of my talk, is what Quintilian calls elocutio. Elocutio, which means the writing, the mechanics of speech, or the mechanics of writing, how to dot your I's and cross your T's. So which means that when we are writing our research, I think we need to pay particular attention not only to what we write, but also how we write. Our style of writing should be a sort of an interesting blend of simple, complex sentences. We shouldn't be using too many passive verbs, and I'll give you concrete, specific examples in a while. And the paragraphs themselves should have clear transitions, so that you're leading the reader. You're leading the reader step by step, just as a storyteller would grab the attention and make the reader want to turn the page. What next? What next? What next? I want you to look at two sets of research titles. The first comprises the first three bullet points, and the second set comprises the next. I want you to unmute and tell me which, according to you, is more researchable, which reads which reads more like a research paper, which is more researchable. You can unmute and you can give me your response, please. No? All right. I guess this refresher course really tired you.
Conflict of identity, class, and gender in the Indian graphic novel.
Right. But what do you mean? What do you wish to say about that title?
Sir, the exploration of identity of male, female, or whatever gender-wise, and class, that is marginalized class and all, gender, in terms of this thing.
You know, I don't want you to pay attention to the topic as such. I want you to look at the words. I mean, the sentence, the way in which. Well, I think all of us would agree that the first three titles are pretty vague, because they don't give the topic. They don't make the topic. The titles don't make the topic specific and precise. And honestly, when you look at when you browse the number of PhD topics on InflibNet, and you take a look at the number of pieces on Shashi Deshpande's and Girish Karnad and Jhumpa Lahiri, a lot of it is simply recycling of previous works. The difference between the first and the second set is clearly that the second set of titles are specific, are precise. They give you key terms, the key words, and also the scope. They give you the scope of the research. Whereas a title such as A Critical Study of Post-Colonialism in the Fiction of Amitav Ghosh, is absolutely rubbish. Because honestly, I mean, you don't even have to write. Why would a researcher want to write a title one's paper or thesis as a critical study? If you're doing research, it is obvious that your study will be a critical study. You don't have to write that it is a critical study. For goodness sake, you're doing research. Research is not writing an expository essay. It's not writing a descriptive essay. So clearly the second set of titles are the ones that are researchable because they are readable, because they are precise, they give you the scope, and they include all the key terms around which the paper will hinge its position, its argument. All right. Look at this slide, 13 ways of looking at a blackbird. I mean, when I was doing my master's, this used to be one of my favorite poets, Wallace Stevens, and this is a poem called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And there is this stanza that you see. The second stanza of that is what you see on the slide. It says, I was of three minds, like a tree in which there are three blackbirds. I find this particular stanza and the poem of Wallace Stevens a good analogy to the dilemma of a young researcher presently in India. I mean, many a times, young researchers come to me, my own students come to me saying, what should I choose first, sir? Author, approach, or text? Author, approach. Should I choose author first? Should I choose approach first? That is the theoretical frame or the theoretical method, or should I choose the text? Well, it's almost like the speaker in Stevens's poem saying, I was of three minds. And many a young researcher comes to me bursting with excitement, having done their MA and bursting with excitement over some nice theory, saying that, sir, I really like feminism or post-colonialism. And so which writers would you like? Which writers should I take up to do my research? Oops. Or there are researchers who come to me saying, sir, I'm super excited. There is this young student of mine came to me saying, sir, I'm super excited about Margaret Atwood after watching Handmaid's Tale on Netflix. So can I take her up for research? Or a third researcher saying, because we are talking of a blackbird and three minds, I'm reading Amitav Ghosh, so what theory can I apply to his work? Oh man, this is, friends, what I call a cookie cutter approach. A cookie cutter approach, where, what do I mean by that? A researcher who has already a particular theory in mind and who wants to apply it mechanically to whichever text comes across, whichever text comes to that he or she reads. I mean, friends, doing research is not riding. It is not riding your theoretical hobby horse. I mean, you may, as a scholar, as a teacher, you may like post-colonialism. So it's not that you ride post-colonialism, giddy up, giddy up, giddy up, and say post-colonial all the way. How many times I've come across, it's common to read a paper where a researcher starts by describing a theorist and his big ideas, and then to return to a close reading. The rest of the paper is a close reading or a close reading of a particular text. And then the same researcher ends the research paper, more or less saying, you know that idea from the big theorist I just told you about. Well, it applies here. Honestly, reading such a paper is not my idea of a good time. And it shouldn't be your idea of a good time either. Because when you are using theory, we use theory by, whatever it is, post-colonial, feminism, eco-criticism, whichever theory we apply, we must use it as a genuine interlocutor and not a voiceover. What I mean is that you must make your critical theory, your theory, your critical approach, an integral and organic part of looking at a text or a bunch of authors or a bunch of texts. So theory is not primary or the text is not secondary. We must, as a researcher, we should not be doing something like this, that we apply a theoretical concept X to a Y text. But rather, what I'm suggesting is that you put theory X alongside, you put both X and Y, that is the theory X to the text Y, you put both of them together in a mutually altering relationship. You have both of them come out of your interpretive process, your analysis changed in some way. When you do this kind of research and write in this fashion, friends, you will get your aha moment, your eureka moment in research. So if you ask me what is the most difficult part in writing a research paper, well, is it identifying a research problem, formulating a hypothesis, reviewing literature, or writing and citing? I would say all of the above. All of them are not problematic. All of them have challenges of their own. But the best advice that I can give to a young researcher is that, first and foremost, please choose a subject in which you yourself have entered into, something that you have liked. In fact, Umberto Eco, in his book, How to Write a Thesis, has a section which is titled, How to Avoid Being Exploited by Your Guide. No, I'm not kidding. How to avoid being exploited by your guide. Because too often, young researchers are led by the nose by their guides to do research in an area which is the guide's favorite. I think research is searching together. It's a search together of both the researcher as well as the guide. Then only, it only then becomes a collaborative, cooperative exercise. Because after all, a guide is not the be all or the end all of research. A guide may not even be the absolute final word in his own subject, which he may have researched for 30 years. Like I said, no research has full stops and no word is final. So what really, therefore, what is a research question? I mean, if going back to, what is research? If I said research is asking questions, then, asking the right question. If research is questions, is asking questions, then asking the right question is more important. Because asking the right question actually leads to the identification of a research problem and then sets you off in finding answers. You see, very recently, a student, a young researcher from another university approached me saying that if she could do research, if she could take up the Great Wall literature as the area of her research. By Great Wall literature, I mean the literature of First World War. I said that, this area, this subject has been covered. I mean, there are libraries and libraries of books written already on that. So much research has, however, she seemed to be very passionate. And so I asked her to do a literature review. And when she came back, we had a Zoom, we had a Google installed. And after a couple of weeks, I gave her a list of reading. After a couple of weeks, she came back and with a bunch of questions. And she said, one of the first things that struck me was when she said that, sir, I don't find any women writers, very few women writers writing about the First World War. In fact, there are women writers seem to be excluded from the canon of World War I literature or the Great War literature. Now, that is something that set us thinking, both as a guide as well as a researcher, that here is a question that is worth investigating, a question that sort of points to the absence of women representation of the Great World War by women writers. And, we know that Great War literature, that is First World War literature, has already produced so much of canonical writings. Um, all of Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen, Edward Thomas, all these war poets that you remember that we did when we were doing our masters come to our mind. But also so much of critical writing on them, on World War literature, has also become canonical, particularly Paul Fussell's, this work, Paul Fussell's The Great War and Memory and Modern Memory, or Stanley Cooperman's, World War I and the American Novel. So here was a researcher, a young researcher who was entering into a territory which had already been researched. However, so much had been researched. However, finding one question to begin with, opening the door for a potentially unexplored area by asking a question. And what kind of question? The right question. Where are the women writers of Great World War literature? And so what we are doing is to set about ourselves reading, asking her to read the works, particularly of somebody like Virginia Woolf, Edith Wharton, or even Willa Carter, to see if we can come up with a body of work produced by women writers on war. And therefore, to prove this long-standing myth that women writers don't write and can't write about war, which is absolute bullshit. Anyway, so research, friends, is asking questions and asking the right questions, because if you then break research, once again, to simplify it, research is basically a 4-step process. What you see on your slide. Topic X is important. Step 2, a lot of research has been done on it. Step 3, however, although nevertheless, no work has been done on the Y aspect of it. And step 4, this paper or this thesis examines the Y aspect. Friends, by now, this very simplified model of what is research actually shows to you that step 1, what do you mean? Step 1 is easily, the identification of a research area. Step 2 is what? Well, literature review. A lot of research has been done on it. So that's your literature review. But I think step 3 is perhaps the most important step in your research. Because the use of the word however, although, nevertheless, all of this makes your research work truly a critical component. The minute you say, that, let's say you write a paper beginning with saying that this paper examines the teaching learning processes during the pandemic. Well, fine, there's so much already written on it. But the minute the paper writer says, nevertheless, there have been only few studies that have examined the impact of MCQs on learning outcomes. I think that's worthy. That makes for the researchiness of the paper. Because the minute you use the word nevertheless, you're pointing out to a gap in the research, gap in this area. So when the research writer says that few studies have examined the impact of MCQs on learning outcomes, well, potentially it becomes a good research topic. It becomes a good research paper. Because articles do not use step 3. Precisely because a descriptive essay, unlike a research paper, a descriptive essay merely collates information borrowed from various sources. A research paper is not a compilation of previously known knowledge or previously established facts. And reviewers of good journals, therefore, want step 3. They want to be told what is the gap in the research in that area, in that subject of your choice that you have uncovered. I feel this aspect lies at the heart of all good research papers. It helps you to understand why the research paper is an argument and not merely a descriptive or an expository essay. It helps you also to understand the importance of having a theoretical framework, the purpose of what is a literature, why we do literature review, and why we collect and analyze data. So far, so good. Are you there with me?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
we
sir.
are.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
A lot of researchers are still confused about the difference between area and topic, and that needs to be kept in mind. For example, again, I'll give you my own personal experience with researchers working under me. So there, one of my researchers wanted to, he heard a talk of mine on medical humanities, and he approached me saying that he found this area, interdisciplinary area, very interesting, and that he would like to work on medical humanities. Right in the beginning, I told him that choosing medical humanities is absolutely, it's too huge, it's too big. So we narrowed, we had a couple of sessions following that. When he approached me the first time, we sat down and then we zeroed in, we sort of narrowed this broad topic of medical humanities to what I told you the other day, uh, illness narratives. And even within the illness narratives, we focused on illness memoirs. So everything that I told you, I think in my third lecture, my second lecture about the writings of South Asian physicians, Atul Gawande, Siddharth Mukherjee. But in his case, his research is not restricted to the writings or medical memoirs of the Indian expatriate or diasporic writers. We have also taken a few Western writers like John Birion. Now, the interesting thing, therefore, is, when I said that research is a collaborative effort, here is an example of a researcher wanting to do research on medical humanities, and I also getting into researching, reading, and studying what is medical humanities, and finding for myself a new area to investigate and explore. So this is marvelous. It is a young researcher who introduced to me a new area called medical humanities, and we both have been working together. Anyway, so the important thing to remember is that your topic should be something that should be clear in its scope and its purpose. All right. You see, I personally like research papers, or even, my MA students to whom I give assignments that begin like, this essay reads Milton's poetry in order to argue. Or an essay saying Christopher Nolan's Memento is a film which explores trauma and its impact on two different levels. I like papers which begin in this fashion. Why? For two reasons. One, for me, it shows a higher skill in academic writing by the researcher. It shows an awareness of an academic style and how to structure a paper. It shows to me, it sort of helps to signpost the reader. When a researcher in the very opening paragraph or the first few lines of the paper writes in this fashion, he sort of helps to signpost for the reader what is to come in the paper. It's like the trailer. You don't beat about the bush. You set out to write what your paper is all about, what is the frame theory that you are going to apply, and what is the purpose of the paper, all in the very first paragraph itself, without any prefaces or preliminaries. So, in other words, you tell the reader, a good paper for me is one that tells the reader what the paper is all about in the first place. It tells me a good paper is one that tells me what the paper writer is going to argue about the topic, what will be his position. And a good paper is also one where, for me, where a researcher tells which method she will use in her analysis and what aspects will the analysis present, what aspects of a text or what aspects of a movement or a trend will the paper present, and in what sequence. Friends, as a researcher, if you, in the very first part of the beginning of your paper, if you answer these questions in your introduction, namely what is the paper all about? How? That is, what is the method you're going to take, you're going to adopt or employ in treating the subject? And finally, when? That is, how will you deal with that subject or deal with its ideas or arguments step by step in the course of writing the paper? So if your introduction suitably answers these questions, what, how, and when, I think this is a paper which helps the reader to read with interest and curiosity. You make the paper reader-centric. All right. So what makes a good research problem, a good research problem good? Sometimes, like with this, another researcher of mine, we were looking, she wanted to do her PhD under me, and we were exploring the range of possible subjects. And it so happened that there was on, on four times there was, in that particular week, there was a hike in the petrol price. And I told her, why don't you do on petrol literature? I told her, why don't you take up petrol literature or carbon literature? Well, I said this because, to think about oil is not just to think about automobiles and price hikes. It's not just to think about derricks and spectacular spills on oceans and seas. No, it is, you see, our culture has become a hydrocarbon culture. Even the way in which you and I are connected today on this platform, on a computer or a phone, this computer or phone is made out of material which comes from oil. So we are saturated, we are steeped and seeped in a hydrocarbon culture. And so I sort of provoked this researcher of mine to investigate the following questions. Remember, I said doing research or writing a research paper begins by asking the right questions. So I gave her a set of questions, which you see on the slide. And what followed really, in trying to answer these questions, well, we finalized our research topic. And what was the research topic? She's already registered under me on this topic, the first one that you see on the slide. Petrofiction, oil capitalism, and environmental abuse in contemporary fiction. Does it look interesting?
Yes, sir.
Very interesting.
Or remember what I had said about Google babies? Here is a paper, my own paper, which I titled as Whose Baby Is It Anyway? Marketing, Motherhood, and Outsourcing Booms in Narratives of the Native. Do you remember the talk that I gave on commercial surrogacy? So, you find your research topics from things that are happening around you. So much of pandemic literature and so much has come out that this becomes migrating microbes, traveling bodies, and border immunities in pandemic narratives becomes a good research paper or a good topic for a thesis. Because now, and what could potentially, I'll come to that a little later. Yeah. What could potentially therefore be your research method or your research methodology? And I want to strongly recommend this book to you, Research Methods for English Studies. It's actually an edited version. How are we doing for time? Okay, another 20 minutes. So this is a book called Research Methods for English by Gabriel Griffith. This is an excellent book, friends, for those who, or all of us who do research, because she makes a distinction between research skills, methods, and methodologies. Well, research skills, she says, are are your library skills, your bibliographical skills, your editorial skills, your IT skills, etc. But research methods, she says, are different from research skills, because research methods are all about how you carry out your research. The choice of the research method, for instance, will depend upon the kind of research that you want to do. But in order to know which method of research you should adopt, you should be aware, you should know and understand all the possible research methods that are available in English studies. By that I mean, what do I mean by research methods? Like clause analysis, textual analysis, or a discourse analysis, or an archival analysis, or the use of ethnographic methods, for instance. These are, and many more. These are some of the methods. These are the various methods that one can choose in depending upon the choice of your subject, depending upon the area of interest. So a research topic, to give you an example, a research topic such as post-coloniality, let's say a research paper such as post-coloniality, nationalism, and Bhadralok identity in contemporary Bengali poetry in English translation. If this is the title of my paper, post-coloniality, nationalism, and Bhadralok identity in contemporary Bengali poetry in English translation, if this is a paper that I want to write, then clearly I will be using some of the methods which are specific, which are relevant to this topic, such as comparative method or a translation method. I would be using translation theories, and I would be using a comparative method for my analysis, because as it says, I'm going to read contemporary Bengali poetry in English translation. So the method is decided only by the subject that you choose. And what then is methodology? Well, methodology is something that is probably the larger framework, like post-colonialism or feminism or eco-criticism or food studies or medical humanities. These are the larger rubrics under which you are going to do your research. I also am, what I give you on this slide is again a selection of papers that I have read from various journals, and I find once again the introduction, the lines from the introduction, very useful, helpful to fashion my own writing style. One may not copy, one may not imitate, but one look at good research papers and how they introduce their subjects in the opening paragraphs is a good way of learning how to structure one's own paper. So take the first one, using the definition of a post-colonial subaltern cosmopolitanism given by Dipesh Chakravarti, I will argue that the Jatra, etc., etc. Now notice that as in the previous examples that I gave you, this example also highlights, it gives you three things. One, immediately it tells us what is the subject, Jatra, which is a form of local theatre in Bengal. But it also tells us the scope and the purpose of the of the research. It tells us about both the method and the methodology. So it talks about post-colonial subalternism. But within that, that is the methodology. But within that, its framework, what we call method, will be to take up the theory of Dipesh Chakraborty to examine the nature, form, and function of Jatra, a form of local theatre in Bengal. I said a good opening in a research paper is one that sort of gives signposts these three things, answers to these three questions: what, how, and when. And this is the kind of opening, this is the kind of line in a research paper that, for me, is a good one. I think, like I said, I can't possibly cover all aspects of research writing, but I chose to look at the opening and the ending in my talk. with particular reference to the title. I've already given you an example of what is good title and what is a poor title in an earlier slide, but take these as paper titles. Once again, the problem here is that there is so much of heavy words, jostling with each other, that I would rather prefer a title such as this, or titles such as these. Well, I'm actually playing a trick on you. These are all titles of research papers, my research papers, but on no account am I suggesting that these are the best ways of titling your research paper. I'm giving you examples from my own research paper titles to point out to something that works for me when I'm deciding on when I'm choosing how to title a paper. What works for me is something that I've followed in the last 20 years or so, and that is that in each of the titles, all of these titles I follow the same template. I mean, the title is broken into two parts. So one is the first one, like a title like When Jane Austen Meets Twitter. So a title, that's only a stem. That only gives, an idea about the broad theme. But then what follows the colon, bridging the digital divide in the English classroom, makes it more specific. I mean, this is something that works for me, and therefore I thought I'll share this with you. These are all titles of my papers published in various journals. Yes, these titles are snappy titles. Notice that these are something, but then not all snappy titles are good, by the way. I'm not suggesting that this is the only template that you should also follow. For example, the title of a paper such as All the World's a Ship, Race and Ethnicity in Moby Dick. Yes, it's a snappy title. All the world's not a state, but All the World's a Ship is a snappy title. But for me, I think a better title, a paper with a title such as Melville's Deconstruction of Ethnicity in any episode in Moby Dick is a better title, because it tells me as a reader something that is more specific and something that promises to deliver in the title itself. You see, once again, as writers, as research writers, we need to make our papers research friendly, reader friendly, because no one is under any obligation to read your paper except. And if readers don't find your papers interesting and pleasurable to read from the very first page, they are put off. They have a feeling that this paper was not written to be read. And so it's very important that titles should be catchy. Also for another reason that, you see, internet research-based databases store thousands of papers on the same subject or the same topic on which you have chosen to write your paper. So internet browsers like you and me or any researcher, when he or she looks up for those keywords, a paper with a catchy title is likely to be read by the researcher or by the browser, more likely to be read than the thousands and thousands of other research titles. So what I'm saying is that giving a catchy title increases the chances of your paper being read, catching the eye of other researchers, and thereby multiplying the possibility of citation of your paper. So every word in your title, friends, is important. So what do you need to do when you are thinking of writing or choosing or framing the title of your paper? These are the things, these are what you need to do. The slide is self-explanatory. Just run your eyes over the bullet points. And I come to the last part of my talk. That, finding, if beginning a paper is important, then ending a paper is equally important. It's like, after all, writing a research paper should have all the elements of good storytelling. It should have a narrative element. It shouldn't be dry. A research paper shouldn't just be a cut and dry piece of rigorous academic exercise, which, as I said, only 5 people are willing to read. Your narrative, your style of writing should be one like a narrator, like a storyteller telling a story, which is fascinating. So if stories should have good beginnings, because the good beginnings hook the reader immediately, hook the listener immediately, then ending the story is also like ending your paper is also like ending a good story. And I personally find it difficult. Endings in my own papers, when I do my research papers, I find endings a little problematic. Well, we all have our blind spots, don't we? But then personally, I mean, or rather, I'd like to present to you, two types of endings, how to end your papers. One is what I call the common one, and the other is the uncommon one. So what's the common one? The common one is the one that comes as A, where in the conclusion, the researcher is merely restating the thesis, or encapsulating the points that the researcher has already made in the body of the paper, or pointing out the significance of the essay. So an example of this common way of ending a paper, not a very imaginative way, but a common way, is I've chosen from one of my own papers, which ends like this. The last lines ends in this fashion. Let me reiterate the two main contentions of my paper. First, notice even the structure of this paragraph sort of, gives in a very simplistic and logical fashion step 4. It restates your twin arguments, the twin arguments that I expanded and elaborated in the body of my paper by saying first and then second. Now, this is a very fairly common way. It's not a bad way, but I'm saying it's not a bad way or a poor way or a less effective way, but I'm saying this is what most researchers do. So, but what is the uncommon way? The uncommon way is where you're actually not putting any full stops, not literally, but you're not metaphorically putting full stops to your paper. The uncommon way is what I call the Sherlock Holmes style, where is all this evidence that you have collected and even your inferences leading to? What possibly could be the direction in which your paper could open up a new direction or a new frontier into research? What if you were to write a paper as a sequel? If you were to write a paper as a sequel to the already written paper, then how would you carry forward the argument that you have made? You get my point? That there are no full stops to your research paper. And so, what is therefore an uncommon conclusion? An uncommon conclusion is something which probably I've lifted these lines from one of the most seminal essays by a researcher who later on turned it into a book, Donna Haraway. Those of us who have read this essay, a cyborg manifesto. And how does she end? I mean, I don't want to go into the details, there's no time, but I'm pointing out again to the way she ends the essay. And she says, from the point of view of pleasure in these potent and taboo fusions made inevitable by the social relations of science and technology, there might indeed be a feminist science. Now, there might indeed be a feminist science. Here is a conclusion without any conclusion. Here is a final part of a paper which makes no final statements. And this is what I mean by an uncommon way of ending a paper. An uncommon way is probably where where there is no conclusion. Your conclusion is there is no conclusion. And I feel personally, when I've been reading and I've been teaching Donna Haraway in my culture studies paper. So this is how, well, to borrow Eliot's quote, this is the way the paper ends. This is the way the paper ends, not with a whimper, but with a bang. Well, as researchers, I want you to play around with your ending like you probably will do with your beginning. Because remember, your ending is the last thing that your reader will be reading. And so you need to keep up that energy. And you need to keep your readers interested till the last word in your paper. And therefore, one final word of advice, one practical tip: revising the paper. Revising the paper is not putting it through an auto spell check. Revising the paper is perhaps the most crucial step, because, you know, inexperienced research writers think that, well, revision is merely cosmetic. When you finish the first draft, when you finish writing the paper, that's only the first draft. And even for my own research scholars, I insist them, yeah, I'm a hard taskmaster, I insist that they write at least 3 drafts of their paper. At least 3 drafts. Because the changes that I want them to bring into the paper are not cosmetic changes. In fact, it is in the process of revising the paper and rewriting the paper that the exercise becomes something more than error fixing. Because revision means rethinking, revision means restating, revision means even readjusting your positions or your analysis altogether. So the point really is that my advice to you as research papers, as research writers would be, don't get attached to your drafts. You know, too often, because of the pressures of so many things that we are doing these days, I mean, once you've come to the last para and you put a full stop, you think, man, good Lord, it's done. But don't get attached to your drafts. As the quote in the slide says, paragraphs don't bleed, so it's okay to cut them. So be an Ezra Pound of your own papers. Keep revising your papers as though they were the first draft or the second draft. Because as a writer, you need to be your sharpest critic. And finally, as research papers, do not for a minute be slack in following the citation conventions, the latest conventions, whether it is the MLA 9th edition or whether it is the Chicago style manual for formatting your paper. Don't be lazy and slip up there, because if too many times I've seen that research, even the research papers, I am the editor of several journals, and when research papers come to me for review, the referee, I see that they have not followed the latest format. So make sure that you are completely thorough with the citation conventions of the journal that is where you're placing your paper. And thank you once again. I'll take any questions or observations or comments. Look, today is your penultimate day, isn't it? Your second last day, right? And you've heard me not once, not twice, but good Lord, 4 times. I mean, I'm sure I must have exhausted you all by now.
No, sir, you have made us refreshed by the so this refresher course has really refreshed us.
Thank you for saying so. Thank you.
Sir, I want to say something.
Yes, yes.
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I just want to say that I have some takeaway points that I'd like to take from this. I like all the phrases like thesis is it's your first love. It's like your first love, and it is like a chess game. All this I've liked immensely, and also that you should end not with a whimper but with a bang. That was also like very, very interesting. Thank you, sir, and we have listened to you very attentively.
So much. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for telling me that you have listened to me attentively.
Any other question, participant?
I think everyone is exhausted. Everyone is tired now.
Thanks for course coordinator Dr. Kapil Singhel sir to give me an opportunity to express my privilege to gratitude towards the chairperson. Dr. Prantik Banerjee is the first chairperson to deliver excellent talk on so many subjects like that literature and cyber culture, illness, bodiness and medicines, commodity of surrogacy, and research and craft of writing. Sir has delivered excellent talk on what is meant by research, how to respond to organizing responses. Another thing, one of the greatest example is taken while how to write a thesis like that. Umberto Eco's how to write thesis, research thesis like first love, and it will be difficult to forget. Research develops long relationship with with a guide also. Sir also given excellent talk on research should be in clear and precise manner. Also, sir has given excellent talk. Research makes accessible and comprehensions. Sir also has guided how to write and how to write theses, how to find various kinds of research problems, various kinds of stages of research, and how to find out criteria of good research. Researchers need to keep energy from beginning to end. And thank you, my dear participants. Honorable Dr. Kapil Singhal sir has given me an opportunity. I once again expresses gratitude to Dr. Prantik Banerjee. Sir has given excellent talk, and from the UGC HRDC and my dear participants, thank you. I now overtake the mic to Dr. Kapil Singhal sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vankara sir. Okay, Prantik sir, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. And thank you, participants. Leave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
So participants, yeah, it's over for the day. We could not establish connectivity with, I think, Pinaki Das sir. We were unable to do that. So that session has been called off. We'll meet tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning.
Okay, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.